Good morning, everyone. Sorry for that slight delay. Just had a few gremlins in the system this morning. They're still working on them, but they involve our beloved colleague who's working outside the building today. J'ouvre maintenant la séance. Bienvenue.
I will now call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 30 of the House of Commons Standing Committee.
Taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Conformément à l'article 108.
Pursuant to Standing Order 1083G, the report titled Housing Canadian Armed Forces Fall 2025 Reports by the Auditor General of Canada referred to the committee on Tuesday, October 21st, 2025.
To welcome our witnesses. From the Office of the Auditor General, Karen Hogan, nice to see you here, Auditor General of Canada, along with Stuart Smith, Director with your office. From the Department of National Defence, Christine Fox, Deputy Minister, nice to see you here back at committee in a different role. Peter Hammersmith, Assistant Deputy Minister, Infrastructure and Environment, and General Eric Simoneau, Chief Military Personnel. Nice to see you here as well. And from the Canadian Forces Housing Agency, Paulo Zuro, Chief Executive Officer, nice to see you here as well. There'll be some opening statements. Ms. Hogan, you'll kick us off for approximately 5 minutes, please.
Bonjour, merci, Monsieur Président.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank you for giving us the opportunity to appear before your committee today to discuss our audit report titled Housing Canadian Armed Forces Members, which was tabled on October 21st, 2025. I would first like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Overall, we found that National Defence had not managed housing in a way that met its current operational requirements and the needs of Canadian Armed Forces members and their families. This is all the more important given that the Canadian Armed Forces plans to increase its personnel in the future. National Defence should have sufficient housing in appropriate locations in order to meet its operational needs and support the morale, well-being, and retention of its members. National Defence did not have reliable data on furnished housing, also known as quarters. In particular, there was a lack of information on the number and location of beds for members in training, on short-term assignments, or in transit to other locations.
The team visited 3 bases and found that many quarters were in poor condition, with problems such as lack of safe drinking water or working toilets. Quarters must meet minimum standards for size, amenities, and physical condition. However, during our audit period, 32 out of the 35 buildings that we examined needed at least one high-priority repair. In addition, the Canadian Forces Housing Agency, which manages residential housing units, did not plan to build enough new housing units to fill existing gaps. As of March 31st, 2025, there were more than 3,700 Canadian Armed Forces members with outstanding applications for residential housing units. However, there were only 205 units available to be occupied. Plans to build new housing units were based on data from 2019, leaving a significant gap. Work being done to update the assessment of housing needs did not account for plans to expand the Canadian Armed Forces to their authorized full strength. Canadian Armed Forces members can be required to move frequently. It's important for their morale and well-being that they can access affordable housing in good condition to meet their needs as well as those of their families. Monsieur le Président, je termine.
Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening statement. We will be happy to answer any questions from members of the committee. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Hogan. Up next.
For approximately 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to come and discuss the Office of the Auditor General's report on housing by the Canadian Armed Forces members. Before I begin, I do want to start by acknowledging the report of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner. I take this matter very seriously. I respect the role of the Commissioner and the office, and I need to focus on my role as a public service leader and here at National Defence. I'm joined with my colleagues to speak to a very important issue of military housing. For CAF members, housing is more than a place to live. It is a fundamental part of their readiness. It provides our members with a place to rest and recharge so they are prepared to carry out their duties. Il garantit que nos familles militaires, les conjoints et les enfants.
It ensures that our military families, partners, and children of those who serve are well taken care of. It also helps us attract and retain the skilled personnel we need to assert our sovereignty and defend our security. Even in my short time at the Department of National Defense, I have learned a lot about the challenges we have faced providing suitable and affordable residential housing units and the steps we are taking to address these challenges. I welcome the OAG's findings and recommendations on how we can build on these efforts. The report in question, published in October 2025, examined how the Department of National Defense manages living accommodations to meet operational needs. That means ensuring that we have the right number of housing units with the right number of bedrooms at the right locations so that members can access housing where they need it and when they need it. The report looked at residential housing units managed by the Canadian Forces Housing Agency and furnished quarters overseen by bases and wings. It also assessed whether National Defense is meeting its obligation to provide CAF members with housing that is affordable, suitable, and adequate.
We determined that there were several key areas of concern regarding how National Defense manages and maintains military housing and how we collect data around housing requirements, as well as the number of units available for CAF members and their family. To begin addressing these issues, they provided recommendations across several key areas, including defining how quarters will be allocated to support CAF operational requirements, ensuring that inspections, maintenance, and repairs are completed, and regularly assessing CAF members' residential housing needs. This includes updating cost estimates, plan to meet any shortfalls, and implementing those in a timely manner, and accounting for the growing number of CAF personnel and changes in their geographic distribution. Le ministre a publié.
The Minister issued a written statement in October accepting the report's recommendations and reiterating the Department's commitment to making real, measurable improvements.
Recommendations, we are developing a comprehensive framework to define the role of quarters in meeting CAF operational needs. It's going to set the standard process for assigning quarters supported by better data and tracking system. That way, we're placing members where they need to be based on operational requirements. The Department will also ensure that quarters are regularly inspected through formal reviews every 3 to 5 years and through local routine checks. Nous allons procéder à la mise en œuvre du programme.
We're also in the process of implementing the Living Accommodation Optimization Program. As part of this program, we will develop plans for inspections and routine maintenance to ensure that timely repairs and guidance around investment decisions are made. The agency also has the Residential Housing Response Plan, which identifies portfolio shortfalls by location, and it will update cost estimates so that our housing stock is.
To ensure CAF members and their families have access to suitable housing, our defense policy commits $1.4 billion over 20 years to modernize housing of CAF members, and that builds on $490 million over 10 years. In February, the Minister also announced that the second phase of Canada's National Housing Construction Program is underway. Combiné, les phases 1 et 2 procureront jusqu'à.
Together, phases 1 and 2 will add up to 7,500 new residential housing units in 25 locations across the country. We have made progress, but we know there's more work to do. We will continue taking action to ensure that members and their families have access to housing.
Auditor General's oversight and input to help us improve and address challenges to housing to CAF members. I look forward to taking your questions. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much. We'll begin with our first round. Consists of 3 members, 6 minutes each. Mr. Bazan, you'll lead us off, please.
Mr. Chair, and it's indeed a pleasure to be able to join Public Accounts Committee today to deal with the Canadian Forces housing issue. Deputy Minister Fox, since you brought up the Ethics Commissioner's report, I wasn't going to bring it up, but since you did, can you assure Parliament and Canadians that you won't be using your office as a public office holder to further the interests of private individuals?
I can assure the committee that I will continue to demonstrate commitment to public service, to build on the strong commitment I've had over my career, and that, yes, I will take my responsibilities seriously as I always have.
Okay, thank you. How many housing units are we short today? What's the wait list?
Thank you for the question. Mr. Chair, the gap that has been reassessed in October based on our latest requirement is between 7,000 and 10,000 housing supports. In that sense, we base our housing response plan based on this gap, and we're looking at leaning forward and meeting the 10,000 units, so the higher spectrum of the range.
So I know when we did this study on military housing at the National Defense Committee that was reported in 2024, October 2024, at that time it was around 6,700. So the situation continues to get worse. So we're not building fast enough. Are we also seeing a large portion of the current housing stock being retired or taken out of the availability for our troops?
So I think first I would say that the construction program will deliver 7,500 residential housing units. But given the urgency and given the need, we also are expanding our housing supply with flexible sort of housing options. So we've been able to buy units in Esquimalt, for instance, 37 units. We've been able to buy units in Dartmouth. So
let's talk about those, because what you've done is gone into local markets that have already been short of housing. If you want to talk about Dartmouth and Halifax, you know, we've had stories of military members who have been living rough, that have been couch surfing. You know, they've been living out of their cars. There was even one story of a guy living in one of the tent cities. And when you go to Esquimalt, where I actually have talked to military members who are working 2 jobs just so they can afford a 1-bedroom apartment and raise a family of 3, you know, you guys go into that market, you buy up existing housing stock that could actually have gone to help alleviate the local situation. It's good for the forces members, but actually exacerbates the problem on the ground in those housing markets. So when are we going to get the new builds?
So we are expediting new builds, but we're also working in lockstep with Building Canada Homes, because we have to have a strategy that is for the country when it comes to housing. So it is about how the military can step up and accelerate the builds, how we can offer appropriate housing for military members, but how that fits into the broader objectives of building more housing across the country.
Okay, because we have to do it both, and we got to leave the housing crisis that we have, and that means we have to build new for our forces, so we aren't taken away from the civilian side. Auditor General Hogan, you had talked about the conditions of the housing, you know, toilets that don't work, no running water, some homes don't even have insulation or proper insulation. You characterize that none of us would ever want to live in there. I just was in Gander at 9 Wing, and we heard there that there was not enough units for single members. They were actually occupying 2- and 3-bedroom homes, taken away from opportunities for families that were being transferred there. The barracks were in poor condition. There wasn't potable water on the base where the barracks were located. They're hauling in water. What else did you find out in your study that demonstrates that this hasn't been taken care of over the last decade?
So I want to clarify that we went and looked at quarters, which are on the bases and not the residential housing units. A slight difference for those who might not know, and obviously the experts are here, but I would tell you in layman's term, a housing unit is unfurnished, whereas a quarters are furnished and are meant usually for temporary short-term stays. So we went to 3 bases across the country, one in BC, one in New Brunswick, and one in Ontario. In the buildings that we found, about 32 out of 35 of them were in need of one major repair at a minimum, which could have included a lack of safe drinking water, as you previously mentioned, functioning toilets or sanitary systems, or damage to exterior walls. The kind of conditions that I know none of us sitting around this table would want to live in, and that we shouldn't expect our Canadian Armed
Of your office, say that those units on base would have been condemned if they weren't on base.
So I'm not an expert in housing, and I'm not sure exactly what it takes to condemn a unit, and I think maybe asking some of the witnesses from the Canadian Forces Housing Agency might be in a better position, but I know that I would want my family to have safe drinking water and a functioning toilet, and making sure that the building is structurally sound. And I think that's why some of our findings around the need to do regular inspections, both in residential units and in quarters, is so essential. That's to help you identify preventative maintenance so you don't get to a place where it's a major repair.
With the Canadian Forces Housing Authority, you guys have your own guideline for assessment of the quality of the housing stock that you manage. When we did our report at National Defense Committee, we made a recommendation that that be standardized with civilian standards. We know that the regulations that you operate under are more subjective rather than quantitative as to the quality of the housing available to our members of the Canadian Armed Forces. Has that changed at all, or are you guys still, making your own decisions on what's good and what's not?
Thank you for the question. The health and safety standards that the Canadian Forces Housing Agency follows are based on the National Building Code and all appropriate standards. I can assure you that all occupied residential housing units meet all of the health and safety standards. The units
But the national code is substandard to most provincial codes.
Well, we are using the latest National Building Code. And usually provincial codes are based on the National Building Code.
Or exceed.
Thank you, Mr. Razan. That is your time. I'm afraid we'll come back to you, I'm sure, later. Shiva, up next, Mr. Osborne, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you. I just want to ask National Defence if you could elaborate on the number of units that you have newly acquired, either owned and operated by National Defence or supplied by other sources, contractors or developers, for example, units that you are planning to put into inventory, the numbers and the timelines for these units.
Sure. So since the announcement of Budget 2024, the Canadian Forces Housing Agency has been working to make rapid progress with the urgency that the times required. So last year in 2025, we launched the Phase 1 of the National Construction Program, as the Deputy has mentioned, with the aim of building 668 units. We are looking at opportunities to always expand. So now our Phase 1 is delivering 800 units. In February, our minister announced Phase 2, which will be looking at building up to a total of 7,500. But we are not stopping there. We are also looking at other ways to include more units. So in 2024, we agreed with Public Works and Procurement Canada to transfer 189 units in Yellowknife. So we are rapidly increasing and expanding our portfolio through this agreement in Yellowknife to support the North. We also added more units through the acquisitions programs, as the Deputy has mentioned, in Halifax, in Comox, and in Esquimalt. And we are looking at adding more and more units through the National Acquisition Program as they become available. We are also looking at leases. So we are in the midst of concluding leases in Yellowknife to add more units in Yellowknife. We are updating our leases in Masset, and we are looking at launching a national leasing program. We are looking at piloting as well. In Trenton, we just did a pilot with landlords where the Canadian Armed Forces members have the first right of refusal in units that are vacant in the market. So we are making rapid progress. So far, in the past 2 fiscal years, just with the alternative solutions, we have almost finished the year at almost 200 units additional, in addition to our construction program that aims to build 7,500 units. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Can you elaborate on, share the data on the number of Canadian Forces members that reside on base, those that are residing off of base in Canadian or CAF housing and I guess housing that is not owned and operated by CAF currently?
So the data that we have currently is about 60% of CAF members do not use CAF housing, about 16% do, and about 4% are in quarters, so they would be in training. So the ratio of members who use a form of CAF housing would be about 20%.
Okay. With the increase in pay for Canadian Armed Forces, some of your members perhaps want to stay on base, others would prefer to look for private accommodations. We understand that. But with the increase in pay for our women and men that serve, has there been a noticeable difference in their ability or the affordability of housing for these members when looking for accommodations outside of those supplied by Canadian Armed Forces?
I think definitely by increasing both the allowances, the pay, and a lot of the benefits package that was announced, it positions members well to compete in the housing industry, to be able to purchase their home outside a base should they choose not to live on the base. So I think what we're seeing is an ability to kind of access market as a result of the increase in pay. So I don't know if Lieutenant General Simoneau, if you would add anything, but.
What I could add is, sorry, we heard earlier that there was a waiting list of 6,700. At the time of the OAG report, the waiting list was 3,700. And as of recently, it's Ms. Zuro could state the number, but it's right there. 1,200. So we see a clear decrease in the number of people waiting for residential housing units. Now, that being said, I think it would be premature to make a direct link between this number and the salary increase, the new posting allowance, and the military service pay, because some of those initiatives have yet to be implemented. But it's certainly a step in the right direction. And I think to meet the demand, and you heard the 10,000 number earlier, this hinges on stable and predictable funding, which we now have. So therefore, the gap will be closed by those two officials. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, small question. I'm told by the chair. In terms of the application process, when does the application come out of the queue? Is it when a member themselves remove the application for housing through the Canadian Armed Forces? In other words, I guess what I'm asking, if you could clarify the accuracy of the number of people that are on that list. If members have to remove their application from the list but have acquired suitable housing, is there a possibility that your waiting list is, in fact, higher than actual numbers?
So usually the members stay on the wait list until they notify the agency that they do not need housing anymore. We usually also, with my side offices, are trying to reach out to members to see if the wait lists are accurate, but it is a work in progress. So we are trying to update them as we are, but I cannot tell you necessarily how much of the wait list is accurate at this point if the agency has not been notified.
Thank you, Mr. Osborne. When members are on a roll, I try to give them time if they got a few extra seconds remaining, which you did, but I appreciate it. So the time might come when I'm forced to be a little closer to the clock, but we're not there yet. Suivant, c'est Michel Lemire par Zoom. Vous avez 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank the entire technical team and the interpreters. I really do appreciate their support. My first question, Ms. Ogan. Thank you for the report, and thank you for shedding light on situations that otherwise we would not know about. Your report says that the conditions are really lacking, but in 2011, we had the last report, and ever since, the rent prices have really skyrocketed across Canada. And your report says that since 2019, changes have been made in terms of the pay and benefits packages of CAF members, which has an impact on their capacity of finding local housing on the market. Do you think that their conditions are adapted to the market's realities today? Well, our audit did not really focus on this one key element, but we wanted to see if there was support from the CAF to its members, and the housing costs are capped at 25% of the individual's income, and of course the market will have an impact, and the information outlining the needs was old information because it dated back to 2019, but market-related information dated back to 2011. So, of course, when you use outdated information, the needs will be too low. So CAF should be able to improve this assessment. Thank you very much. Ms. Fox, first of all, thank you for being with us today, for helping us understand the matter. Were you surprised when the Auditor General informed you that 32 of the 35 housing units needed urgent repairs? Thank you for the question. When the report was published in October, I was working at the Privy Council office, but I was nonetheless informed of the report and its conclusions. When I started working at the department, I worked with the team from the get-go to understand the complex housing situation, to better understand the department's action plan, and also to better understand how we were going to implement the recommendations from the Auditor General's report. Of course, it's a challenge in terms of how quickly we need to act. And of course, we do need new housing. It's clear that we need intermediary solutions as well as housing investment in terms of investment into the housing stock we already have. And also the inspection system and its integrity are of key importance. We have to have the governance and the necessary tools in place to make sure that inspection happens on an ongoing basis. So the team is aware of the importance of this file of housing for our CAF members and will continue to do the work in the weeks and months to come. Beyond all this, there's a lot of activity and conversations happening with the industry, which they need to be our partners in this effort. There are virtual conversations that are taking place as well, so that we can make progress in terms of housing across the country. While in Quebec, we have infrastructure that can be impacted by freeze and thaw cycles. Do you have up-to-date information in terms of those gaps and repairs and maintenance that might be required? Because you referred to the 32 out of the 35 bases and housing groups that need intervention, maybe the 3 remaining also need some help. So do you have additional information on that, and can you tell us what has been done to those buildings since the report was published? Of course, we need to have an inventory to keep track of what's being done in every building, not just those that were assessed by the Auditor General's team, but everything else that's also included in the national defense portfolio. So we need to be rigorous and have the data. And we need to have regular reporting done. So the department undertakes to carry out this regular reporting on the advances that are being made. I'd like to have that information. In the report, there's a reference to 205 units that are available and more than 3,600 people who are requesting to have access to these units. So what new information can you share with the committee on that? Yes, to answer your first question, we can share that information with you, and I can hand it over to Paola so that she speaks to the current needs. Thank you. As was mentioned, the data we have dates back to spring and summer, and of course it's during those periods of the year when there's personnel movement across the country that we receive the highest number of requests. So we need to wait a little bit for the lists to stabilize and settle. Right now, there is about 1,300 people who are still on that waiting list at the national level. So 1,300 is the number. There are others who have housing solutions on the local housing market but wish to have access to CAF housing. That is priority 3 in our categorization. But category 1 represents the members who are in a position to move elsewhere in the country. We publish our plans every year. We have an annual plan, annual report that is published outlining what's been done in the previous year and what's in the pipeline. So we just closed the last fiscal year, so we're preparing the report, and I highly encourage that you take a look at the report when it's available, because it really gives you a lot of information on the portfolio, on the acquisitions, and on how we're spending the funding. And the majority is spent on the portfolio. More than 84% of the funding is reinvested in housing. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Our second round, which would consist of 5 members of various times. Monsieur Detel, pour 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, chers collègues.
Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, hello. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the committee, and especially General Simoneau, who comes from the Quebec City region. And he served previously in Haiti, Kosovo, and Afghanistan, among other theaters. So I would like to salute all service members, men and women, in our armed forces, be it the Army, the Navy, the Air Force. These men and women put their lives in danger. That is why we are deeply affected when we come across such a striking report, which shows a lack of respect towards men and women in uniform and their families. We talk about housing. We're talking about people who put their lives at risk, but when they come home, it's really not even appropriate to use the term home because the conditions are not appropriate. In 2026, how do you explain the fact that these individuals don't have access to proper water in these housing units? Thank you for the question. We absolutely do recognize the scale of the challenge. We have to make sure that we have housing for CAF members. It's essential that we respond to the needs, and we need a global approach. We need improvements in housing. We need housing that is available, but we also have other needs, childcare services, So we are looking into all of these services, and we are accelerating housing building efforts and infrastructure. So we have to rectify the issues that have been observed, that we learned through the AG's report, and we have to act with urgency. Madam Deputy Minister, how can you explain that things have come to this point? It's housing for our armed forces members. It's not something that happened overnight. It's been going on for decades. How did it get to this point? In the report, it says that only 2 high-priority maintenance and repair efforts have been completed. So people who are defending our country, when they come home, while 90% of the time where they live or their living conditions are not well taken care of, they're not repaired, and the families go through the same thing. So how did we let things deteriorate to this point year after year? The department's action plan takes this very seriously, and we have the investments that are upcoming to correct these issues that have been ongoing issues, as you mentioned, and we will support our CAF members. It is absolutely part of our action plan. Well, it's good to look towards the future. The government keeps talking about the big budgets and everything, but let's go back to the question of evaluation and assessment. Well, there is a housing problem across the country. How is it possible that the basic information that is used to assess the needs dates back to 2011? I think over the years we've had systems in place, but they were not as rigorous as necessary. So we are fixing these processes. We are putting initiatives in place. I think it was about making choices at the time, how investments to be made by the department were chosen, which maybe did not meet the challenges across the country. But now we have more investment going into defense and for CAF members, and some of it will help improve housing across the country. Well, it's clear that it can't be any worse. Lieutenant General, on a day-to-day basis, you're, of course, in close contact with the men and women in uniform, but you're also in touch with others. You were at Valcartier with the Air Force, but Army elements as well. What's your assessment? Of course, you are a high-ranking member of the Canadian Armed Forces. What has been the feedback you've received from airmen and women and other members of the Canadian Armed Forces with regard to challenges in terms of housing? Thank you for the question. As the force of last resort, Canadian Armed Forces have always prioritized deployed operations, domestic operations, so everything that's operational so that we can offer the support to the support that's needed to Canadian people. When we hit the budget limits, that's where the priority goes. What I can say as we speak is that families I've been in touch with and I'm still in touch with, they are in need of investment in housing, and these individuals and their families move a lot across Canada and across the world, and this represents a problem for these families because when you move a lot, it's really a bit of a challenge. Because we keep making improvements to the housing units that are available, and childcare services is another challenge. It's usually during the first moments of a deployment that people are having to make decisions that are worth thousands and thousands of dollars, because we're talking about certain percentages of the individual's pay at that point in time. So we're trying to make things a bit more flexible for members. We talked about 7,500 units that are going to be constructed. 2,500 will be rental units in the local housing markets, so a total of 10,000. So I think that is very positive, and that is getting a good welcome. Thank you very much.
Yep, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. We are very thankful for the Canadian Armed Force members' service and sacrifice, and this is why this report is so important. My first question is to Lieutenant General Simoneau. You were just talking about some of the unique needs of the military service. Could you expand more on that, given that they must be ready to move at any location where they have to go? And what is being done to make it easier?
Thank you for the question. I would break it into two buckets, if you would. We've been discussing a lot the residential housing units, which are for members and their family. This, as I mentioned earlier, hinges on the fact that when those decisions are taken for a rotation, they need to plan for single-income family levels, and therefore the availability of housing is really important. But I would like to also bring in the fact that as we grow the Canadian Armed Forces, contrary to what is being perceived in the social media and in the public domain, we are attracting people at our doors. We did have some issues to process them, which we're ironing out and we're working through as we speak. But my real limiting factor to grow the Canadian Armed Forces right now is the second bucket of units. It's the duty quarters. So I need beds. I need bed space for end quarters to host basic training in Saint-Jean and Borden, for example. So, and this requirement is very well done, and my colleague here, Mr. Hammerschmidt, is moving out on replicating half of what you see in Saint-Jean sur Richelieu, the big mega structure. Half of it will be replicated in another form in Borden, for example, and that's only for basic training. Because if we don't invest into duty quarters, we won't be able to grow the CAF, but that's being addressed. So I just wanted to make sure to address both buckets of requirements. Thank you for the question.
Given that the Armed Forces is in the process of adding an additional 6,300 members, will the acceleration of the housing strategy be enough? Ms. Fox?
Yes, I can start. That's exactly why we need that flexibility, and the strategy that we've deployed is very much, we can't lose sight and focus on the new builds, the 7,500 units, but we also have to think creatively around how are we going to supplement that, and that's purchasing commercial units to offer more military housing options. It's looking at a continuous evolvement of our recruitment plans and kind of when we see that increase and how we match that to need. And I think we have to be creative around modular housing and other types of innovations to move faster. So yes, the plan is in lockstep, and we work very closely together to say, as we grow the military, what does the housing stock look like, and how do we use creative techniques to make sure we meet the demand?
What are some of the creative techniques that you're using with the private partnerships?
Yeah, I think, thank you for the question. I think these alternate solutions are really looking at those partnerships for residential units. I mentioned Esquimalt. We've got 37 units there. Dartmouth, 140. So we are looking at how D&D can advance procurement in order to access and get on the market. And I think those partnerships allow us to offer more immediate housing options and to relieve some of that pressure. So we talked about Yellowknife and Masset. So these are all sites we're pursuing across the country. And we've deployed in these locations, but we're looking in other locations to see how we can meet the demand as it comes in. So it won't necessarily be limited to what we're presenting today, but these are what we've advanced so far. So I'm not sure if you'd add anything.
Yes, I will add as well the dual-use pathfinder that was announced in Budget 2024, where the department is going to be using underutilized land to leverage private sector to build housing for the Canadian Armed Forces members and also Canadians. So there are 3 locations that were announced, Toronto, Esquimalt, and Halifax. and we are getting ready to leverage. We already hire brokers to work with industry to be able to, for the private sector, to build, operate, maintain all the houses. So there will be more advance, more progress soon on that front.
Thank you very much. That is your time, Ms. Yip. Encore une fois, Monsieur Lemire.
Once again, Mr. Lemire, you have 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Fox. I'd like to talk about the situation in Quebec City at Valcartier. The municipality is welcoming the new housing building, but this causes service-related issues for Shannon Municipality. The mayor said that the evaluation of the territory was 7% lower than what it's supposed to be. How do you explain this gap, and are you going to try to fix this problem? Yes, we are working closely with the municipality. Paola will give more detailed information. If I understood the question well, it has to do with the evaluation of the housing and the difference between military housing and municipality housing. Well, the question is about the real estate assessment and the amount that the Shannon municipality was expecting to be paid from the Canadian Armed Forces compared to what the actual payment. Well, it's really early in the process to have these numbers. We just started the planning for about 1,000 housing units that will be built, so it's too early to say. We don't have the plans and the designs yet, but we will continue to work with the municipality once we have the plans available, and we'll try to support them in that process. Thank you, because we wouldn't want this situation to have negative impacts, because municipalities are already facing a lot of challenges. Could we get the breakdown of the funding allocated to the renovation of housing units per province and per base as part of your new planning? And can we also learn the latest information of the status of housing units in Quebec? You can send that information in writing to us. I'll have another question for you. You made a recent announcement, Ms. Fox. You were referring to 1 or 2 bedroom housing unit construction. Who came up with that assessment? And is it because we're looking to recruit new members? Are they mostly single individuals, or will they have different needs? Could you shed some light on that analysis, as well as the current real estate stock you have? Yes, there was an assessment, and we have tools that we use to determine the current needs. Of course, there needs to be a certain variety of options, but we need to go back 5 years and then see who is coming in via recruitment to determine what their needs are. We can, of course, come back to the committee with more detail on that, but there's a methodology. Thank you very much.
Up next, Mr. Kirk, you have the floor for approximately 5 minutes, please.
Yes, thank you all for coming today. I appreciate your attendance. Ms. Fox, I just wanted to turn back to you because you had mentioned the ethics report and your answer to my colleague, and some of the reports that I've read since Friday. You haven't really acknowledged any wrongdoing or any errors. So my question is this because you believe your conduct was in line with government's diversity, equity, inclusion guidelines in federal public service?
Thank you for the question. What I would say is, as I noted earlier, I'm taking this extremely seriously, and I believe I had genuine intentions, but I am reflecting heavily on, as a leader, how I make change is as important as the change itself. So the totality of my action when it comes to diversity and inclusion is well beyond this particular context. In every job that I've held, I've put diversity at the forefront of what I do. So putting together systemic changes, like actually including the call to action in executives' performance management agreements, in promoting talent, in looking at data within the department to identify gaps and challenges. And in some of the departments that I've worked, Indigenous Services Canada, Immigration, there were systemic barriers and there were resistance to change. And so genuinely, as a leader, I believe in these issues. I believe it is important to lead by example. I think I have to reflect on, as a leader, how my decisions had impacts. And that I am taking enormously seriously.
Okay, fair enough. I thank you for that answer. But in this current specific person, they couldn't speak French. They were unfamiliar with software. They had no experience in government and lacked expertise. Again, you still haven't acknowledged any wrongdoer, any errors in judgment? I just find that, like, you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but I just find that very concerning, because now you're in a portfolio where we need to move things forward, and we're here to collaborate on that. But your answer to my colleague was just a little bit jarring, because you used the words continue in this, and you answered quite fine there. But again, if you don't acknowledge any wrongdoing or errors, the Canadian public is going to want to know how you move forward.
Thank you for the question. I would say that an individual who I went to university with 25 years ago reached out with a genuine interest to join the Federal Public Service. The ADM responsible for the program had asked me to share CVs that come in for that particular unit. The individual had experience in client service, something that the government struggles with. We don't do client service particularly well, and in this unit, it was obvious that we didn't. And so as I looked at the interest and the gap, and as I looked at the data that we had in our departments about the experiences of Black men, I decided to refer the person as was requested. So the actions in this particular context, I have to reflect on, of course. I have to think about the role that I occupy and whether or not it's best to administer change differently. But this was a context of trying to change an underperforming unit within the department that occupied a lot of my attention.
Fair enough, but the person couldn't speak French. So for service and communications, that's a key factor here on the Hill. I will just leave it at that. Thank you very much, and I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll move now to Mr. McKinnon, please. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to start with Ms. Hogan. You mentioned you studied 3 bases. Could you tell me what those 3 bases are?
Mm-hmm. We visited 3 bases so that we could cover the Navy, the Army, and the Air Force when we visited. So we went to Esquimalt in BC, Gagetown in New Brunswick, and Trenton in Ontario. Those bases had about 45 buildings across them where there were quarters, and we looked at a sample of 35, and that's where we found that 32 out of 35 were in need of at least one major repair.
So would you say that your data from these bases is fairly representative of the situation at large?
I'm going to see if Stuart can maybe add something there. I can tell you a little bit about those 3 bases. The average age of those buildings was about 60 years old, and about 20% of them had not had their inspections in the required time. So that just gives you a sense of those 3 bases, and I'll see if Stuart wants to add.
Yeah, I'm happy to add. Certainly, in terms of the data we look at for the conditions at those bases, certainly they're representative of the situation at those 3 locations. We also chose the bases with consideration for factors like geographic coverage of bases, within the Canadian Armed Forces, covering Army, Navy, and Air Force, and also just from engagement with the CAF to look at what will be good representative bases to examine. So we're comfortable that the results we observed at those bases does indicate the actual situation at quarters at other CAF locations.
Okay, thanks. So I note also that this study was done from, I think, March 2024 to April 2025. That's a year ago. Do we have any idea how things may have changed, improved, got worse?
So our period under audit went from April of 2023 to March of 2025, and then we released a report in October of 2025. So yes, I acknowledge that an entire year has elapsed since we looked at things. We did in October get a little bit of update, and we saw that there were fewer residential units available than we had seen at the end of March. But to get more updated information, you have the two organizations here who can give you much more up-to-date information.
Thank you. So I guess I'll switch to Ms. Fox, I guess. When people are assigned to a new base, is the general expectation that they will find accommodations in the market, general market around them, or is the expectation that they'll find something on base?
I think that we respond to the needs that we receive, and I think there's choices that military members would make about whether they prefer on base or residential outside base housing. I think the training elements are different, obviously, in the context of their training requirements, but there is a choice, and at the moment, about 16% choose to live in CAF residential housing.
So a place like Esquimalt, you have Victoria, you have Sydney, that whole area. You've got a large area of market-based availability for residences, but someplace like Yellowknife, quite different. So how does that affect your decisions and the planning for residences?
Yes, exactly. And I think, even all of them are different market conditions as well. So we look at housing allowances in that context. But I think the review of kind of where the military needs to build is very much based on the availability in a particular area, which is why the partnership with Yellowknife was so important in light of the lack of housing then, and then our big investments into infrastructure in Yellowknife for multi-purpose facilities for the CAF, for our Joint Task Force North. So we look at the market conditions, we look at availability, we look at need, where are we going to deploy armed forces, how do we actually match the work of the housing strategy with that. So there is definitely a geographical lens that we put to that before we make determinations about the various builds.
So I don't know if it was you, someone mentioned 189 units in Yellowknife. That's quite a, that sounds like a lot for Yellowknife, but when we have to meet up with, we have to get 10,000 units eventually, we'll never get there if we do it at 200 here and 200 there. How do we do that? Who is responsible? Who do we hold accountable for meeting this requirement?
So you're absolutely right. It has to be a multi-pronged strategy. So in the instances of kind of where we're making significant investments, so we've got 800 new units that are going to be built, across locations. And then in addition to that, we've got sort of several funding sources. But just to give you a sense of scale, in Gagetown, Valcartier, Kingston, Petawawa, and Edmonton, it's about 1,000 units that we will need to build in those locations. And then Halifax, Trenton, and Esquimalt, we're probably looking at 500. So there's a combination of new builds and scale with sometimes quick solutions to be able to offer housing right away. And sometimes that's, 37 units is not a ton, but it is important for the need we have there now, and it allows us a little bit of flexibility. So there's definitely different strategies to address that growing need.
So who do we hold accountable for making sure this is done?
National Defense with our housing agency.
Thank you. That is your time, Mr. McKinnon, but there'll be a few more spots down the road if you got follow-ups. Beginning our third round, again, 5 members of various times. Mr. Stevenson, you'll kick us off for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you for all of our witnesses here. I appreciate you coming here, and of course appreciate the efforts that our military have for our society. Can I start? I'll start with Ms. Hogan in regards to the audit, can you tell me, was it more of a process that was lacking, or was it more of a following through with the process when you talked about how certain things haven't improved? So when they're looking at the evaluations of housing, would you say that they had an adequate process that they could say, this is how we judge it, this is where our needs are? Or would you say that they didn't, and they just didn't follow through on those? Or would you say it's more of a part where they are not even, the process itself is lacking to understand what they are in need of?
So I think there's many elements that contributed to not having reliable information on the number of quarters and the condition of those quarters. Many of the bases manage that on their own. So to have a global picture is what is really needed so that you can decide where you use the limited resources that you have. For us, it was difficult to see where track maintenance on residential units and the quarters because of how National Defense would budget for maintenance and repairs. It's the whole organization. So we couldn't zero in and say, why didn't you or did you spend on these quarters? We knew that their budget was about 2% on repair, but they didn't spend all of that. So, I think why they're not spending all of that will be a conversation to have with National Defense. And then we saw assessments done. 26% of assessments were not done on residential units, 20% not done on quarters. That means a large amount were done. But without a comprehensive picture, you just don't know the amount of needs that you have. So how do you fund it? And then how do you decide where to allocate the limited resources?
In your recommendations, did you have more recommendations into how to improve the process other than having a global picture? Considering we have to, as we've just already discussed, you can't just add 200 here or 200 there. We have to have a national strategy. So would you say in your recommendations they were accepted, and we've actually got something going forward as a plan and specific dates to have specific numbers rather than 10,000? Do we have, we're going to have 200 by the end of June, we're going to have another 2,000 by the end of this year, and we'll have, because if we need some dates to actually have something to measure by when we're actually going to accomplish this.
So all of our recommendations were agreed to, but we give the department limited space to respond in our report, as you can imagine. That is where this committee plays a big, important role. You get a very detailed action plan when the department comes here, and that's where I would expect for you to really see some concrete dates and deliverables so that you can hold the department accountable. But I think what's important is my recommendations, or at least I've had a tendency since I've been Auditor General, to not issue a recommendation that says do what you already committed to doing, because we're going to go through all of this work for a department to say, well, we'll continue to do what we're doing. So we really try to drive a change that we hope will help improve how this all goes forward. So you'll tend not to see a recommendation that just says, go inspect your buildings like you said you would.
Thank you. My next question is for Lieutenant General Lair. You mentioned about the lack of training. You said duty quarters is what you used. Can you, in your opinion, we've had this goal of expanding our military, adding personnel. Is it going to be a limiting factor for the amount of housing that we have versus, or like, is the cart, what's coming first, the cart before the horse here? Are we going to actually get those people and not have them in tents before we actually get them trained? Or are we going to try and get the housing before we actually get them? To me, we need the additional military personnel, so we have to have them too. But what's the plan here that you see and what's going to be the limiting factor?
Thank you. That's an excellent question. Being the limiting factor, we need to, just for basic training, we're talking 2,000 quarters, beds to host recruits. So that comes first. Before
do you have a plan time frame that you can see that's going to actually work for the number of recruits to get them in the next year or two?
So CDS has given me the mandate to grow the force on the reg force to 71,500 by 2029, April 2029. So that's what I'm going for. We were at 63,000 4 years ago. We closed that gap by 2,000 last year, 2,000 this year. So we're at 67,000 as we speak. So well en route to meet this number.
I'm afraid that is your time, Mr. Stevenson. We'll come back to you. There'll be time later. So, Ms. Suds, welcome to Public Accounts. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, and pleasure to be here. As we've heard a bit about in the previous questions, there's been a commitment to grow the presence of the CAF in the Arctic and in the North. So 2 questions in my mind stem from that. And first of all, can you outline what the plan looks like to ensure that there is the required housing in the Arctic and the North to meet that growth? But then secondly, thinking about the impact of that increased presence in the North on local infrastructure. And if there is a plan to assist, typically this is municipalities that it falls to, but is there a plan to ensure, adequate local infrastructure investment at the same time?
Thank you for the question. Mr. Chair, I would say there is going to be significant investment in our 3 territories as part of our emphasis on Arctic sovereignty and defense. $32 billion the Prime Minister announced, and that is, very much about military capability. But to your point, we're spending a lot of time working with territorial governments, Inuit organizations, First Nations, Métis, to really outline the impacts, as you noted. And I think some of the benefits of this increased investment beyond the military capability is that we're going to look at what are the power and infrastructure needs for defense that can also benefit communities. What is the wastewater system upgrades that can support communities and the military? What can we do around broadband and connectivity? So I think it's going to be very important for us to have plans, but sit down and talk it through with leadership in the North to help inform the decisions that we're going to make. And so we've done a lot of engagement. We're going to continue to do more, especially as we get closer to some of the planning, some of the contracting. And then within government, work together with the Major Projects Office, who will also be making some investments, because, one of the challenges will be around, infrastructure building is complex, and there's, in the North, it's even harder, the skills and workforce availability to achieve what we're trying to achieve. So it is a real opportunity for the country. But in order for us to have success, we really need to be guided by those who live in the North.
Thank you very much for that, and indeed such a massive opportunity for the North as we move forward. Mentioned briefly, but maybe we can expand upon some of the innovative new ways that we are looking at building housing at scale rapidly. Is there a plan specifically for the North, perhaps entailing some modular, some other ways of ensuring that we meet these targets as quickly as we can?
I think definitely the answer is yes. Things are on the table in terms of, we had a conversation with a team from Nunavut government to talk about some of the modular housing that they're exploring for their communities and whether or not that would be an option for D&D. And I think we'll have to determine the specific housing allocations that are required. We'll have to look at what's happening with under the other initiatives like Nunavut 3000, which is obviously a commitment to build more homes in Nunavut. So we'll have to kind of sit down, but yes, we are open to different ways to build faster, and modular is one of those, prefab is another.
And I know they're not here today, but is the Defence Construction Canada organization involved in these discussions?
Yes, absolutely. Defence Construction Canada, they're a core partner for us, and they're effectively our procurement arm, and they issue construction contracts and manage those contracts to ensure they're delivered on time, on schedule, and meet standards. And so we are intimately integrated with DCC on all of our construction activity.
And maybe switching gears slightly, and I don't recall who mentioned it, so my apologies, but the pilot program with Trenton, I believe I heard mentioned. It's such I mean, it makes incredible sense, first right of refusal for CAF. Can you speak to how that came to be and any progress to date leveraging that?
Yes, for sure. So this was an idea that the agency started to explore when we heard that the Air Force uses this for runways. So they get first right of refusals to use runways, and we thought it could be applicable to housing as well. And given that our members, sometimes they just have a 1 week to house hunt, it is very hard sometimes that week. Those houses are not necessarily available the week they come with their families to look for a house. So the concept evolved into having a first right of refusal, which means that we're working with landlords to make sure that those houses are still available for Canadian Armed Forces members. And in that sense, the agency is committing to keep the houses for certain times of the year if their previous family left, and then the next family might come in a month or two from that time. So we are committing to working with landlords, and we will be responsible for vacant units to make sure that those units still stay available for the Canadian Armed Forces members and their families. We started small because it's a pilot, so we initially have access 10 units, and in the contract we have up to 75 that we can access. As units become vacant, then the landlords contact the agency, and we confirm whether we would like more, depending on our wait list.
Thank you. That is the time. Suivant encore, c'est Monsieur Lemire par Zoom.
Mr. Lemire, 2.5 minutes on Zoom, please. Thank you, Chair. I'm going to repeat my question with regard to the situation regarding Valcartier and Shannon Municipality, because we looked at the interpretation, and I think some of the elements of that question were misinterpreted. I wanted to talk about property tax. So last month, it came out that the assessment was 7% lower in terms of the property tax. So how do you explain this difference in property tax of 7%, and how are you going to take care of this problem? Because for municipalities, these amounts are important to develop services in their area. So how are you going to bridge the gap between their assessment and your assessment? Thank you very much. It's an excellent question. It's really important to determine these numbers exactly, the property tax numbers. It's a process that we're undertaking with Public Services and Procurement Canada. We are in the process of planning the number of housing units we will construct, we will build. When it becomes more clear how many housing units we will build and where we will build these, we'll work with PSPC and the municipality to determine the exact payments that will be made in property tax. Is this something that happens in other municipalities? Are you aware of other cases, other municipalities in Quebec or elsewhere who are experiencing a gap between what was predicted initially and the real number? Is it a question of maybe saving money on the backs of municipalities who are in a tough situation with regard to building houses? Well, Canada Homes is if that is happening on a recurrent basis, then it's a failure from the get-go. So are there other cases? It is rare, but there have been examples with other municipalities. But of course, we're trying to be good neighbors. We're not specifically trying to reduce the property tax that is due because we want to support municipalities and the infrastructure needs to be in place to support us. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Mr. Floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Auditor General Hogan, in your report, in recommendation paragraph 61, you asked National Defence to evaluate their policies on living accommodations and how it impacts upon retention, especially for longer serving members. In the response from National Defence on that recommendation, they're taking until December 2027 to come up with the policies that will inform the development of housing stock. Is that fast enough, considering the shortage and the urgency of retention that we have?
Well, if I was a member waiting, I would tell you that is not fast enough, no.
Okay, I appreciate that. So in the department's own report on the evaluation of Canadian Armed Forces retention and talking about everything from doctors to daycare to housing, they said that 9.4% of junior ranks are prepared to leave the forces. So if they're going to take 2 years to do the evaluation of the policy, are we risking losing up to 20% of our members in the Canadian Armed Forces? And I'd ask first if the Auditor General's office wanted to reflect on that, and then I'll ask the department and CAF to respond.
I mean, I think that's a difficult question for me to reflect on. I just know that if updating a policy will take you 2 years, then action won't happen until after then. And I would hope that it would happen simultaneously or much faster. So.
Well, so you want to respond, General?
If I may, thank you.
You're the chief of military personnel.
I would say that policy development is seldom done in isolation. It's always in parallel to concrete action, and that's why we do pilots. That's why we refine policies. We tried it on the go. So this is what this is what we're undertaking as we speak on the living accommodation policy. But
if I may interject, because I've had a lot of conversations across this country with base commanders, those serving in the armed forces, and the common theme here is that this government, the Liberals, haven't been listening. We've had a decade, and it's fallen on deaf ears, knowing that we've had this housing crisis. I know when we did the study in National Defence that we reported in 2024, the 2 years prior to that, there was less than 40 residential housing units built in over 2 years. And we knew we had a crisis then. That was, at that time, estimated around 6,300 housing units short. So if we're doing it in isolation, or it's not happening in isolation, we're doing it in parallel, like 40 houses don't cut the mustard.
I think that we've looked at all the recommendations, and we've got timeframes set for action. And there's a lot that are kind of linked to each other. So we need to kind of speak to people and get stakeholders into kind of telling us some of the things that they would like us to change. But there's things that we can do much faster, the facilities conditions, the inspections. So we've got a time frame in order to execute, and we have investments in order to make. And I think that is the difference at this time than previously.
So I'll just say this again. We had at committee Serge Tremblay, who is the General Manager of Infrastructure and Technical Services with the Canadian Forces Housing Authority, and he's the one that confirmed that there was only 40 houses built. If I'm not mistaken, in your testimony today from CFHA is that there's only 200 homes scheduled to be built this year, and is that correct? Is what you said in your comments so far?
No, I mentioned that we just finished the fiscal year adding almost 200 homes
almost
through
200
the
in 1 year.
alternative solutions. Not necessarily through the construction, but through the acquisition and leasing space.
Yeah, which creates another difficulty. So the big question then comes down to, if we're only going to get somewhere around 200 homes built or acquired for the Canadian Forces, that we have a shortage of 7,200, we're talking 36 years before we address the need, never mind the aging housing stock that we're going to have to retire. I don't know, square the circle for me. How do we get there?
Yes, I'll clarify. So the phase 1 National Construction Program for Housing, I'm not mandated to speak of quarters, but I'm speaking just for housing. We committed to build it over the next 5 years. So by 2029, 2030, we will have those 800 houses available for the Canadian Armed Forces members and their families. Now, the phase 2...
But you haven't built that volume of housing since, what, World War II? So
yes, you are right. It's the largest military housing campaign ever since the portfolio was built in the 1950s. So we are adapting the organization as well as our partner DCC to be able to deliver on this big construction program. I'll also add that the phase 2 that was just announced is going to be concurrent to that phase 1. So as we deliver those 800 houses, we're going to also be delivering thousands and thousands of houses across the country.
Thousands and thousands is how many?
Up to 7,500. That's the plan. However, I will also mention that the housing requirement exercise that we just finished in October is going to be an annual exercise. So we will be looking at real estate markets, the CAF composition, and the growth. And we will be going back to the department to approve a housing requirement update every year. So we will evolve to meet the current and the future housing needs of the Canadian Armed Forces.
So, you know, we don't have a whole lot of faith in these Liberals to deliver on housing. They've actually have missed their mark every year over the last decade on everything they've promised on housing. So, you know, again, ambitious plan, how are you going to deliver it?
So we are delivering through industry. As I mentioned, DCC is our construction, our contract partner and delivery arm, but everything we will be doing, it is with industry. And that's why we have, DCC has set up an engagement day to day, actually, to engage with industry. We have more than 800 private sector firms engaging today to understand more what we want to deliver and where. And so we are going to be working through more design, build contracts to plan, design, and construct, and leaning on their capacity to deliver fast. We're also going to be leaning on modern methods of construction. We're working with Build Canada Homes to align our requirements on modern methods of construction, and that will help us deliver faster. We know that throughout the country, there may not be capacity for modular everywhere we build, so we are still open to use all types of construction in our contracts.
Thank you. That is your time, Mr. Bazan. Up next is Mr. Osborne. You have the floor for about 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm always hesitant to get political at these committee meetings because they're not meant for that, but I do have to point out that the previous Conservative government dropped below 1% of spending on our national defence. The new government has committed to going to 5%.
Order, Mr. Bazan. Mr. Osborne, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, and I didn't interrupt the previous speaker, so I do respect you, Mr. Chair, in containing that. The new government has committed to going to 5% of GDP. So in addition to putting in place Build Canada Homes and other strategies to allow national defence to meet your mark in providing the housing that is necessary for our Canadian Armed Forces, the women and men that serve. A couple of questions. In terms of Canadian Armed Forces establishments, garrisons, bases, etc., and just looking at the garrison that's located in St. John's, for example, there are no quarters there, there are no housing attached to that. So for new members going to that location, and, you know, I'm not, drawing attention to that particular garrison because there are others that need it, but are there plans for that and other garrisons to put in place not only quarters for training purposes, but also housing units for short term, at least, while a family come to a garrison or to a base and can settle in with a bit of flexibility looking for longer term housing in the market?
Yes, thank you for the question. So in October, when the agency updated the housing requirement, we realized that there are some locations where we do not operate right now, where there would be members in need of housing support. Saint-Jean is one of them, and the Living Accommodation Board endorsed the housing requirement looking for us to look in Saint-Jean. So in the next months, we're going to be exploring, defining what will happen in Saint-Jean, but housing is going to be part of that solution.
Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Some of my neighbours and friends who are members of the Canadian Armed Forces talk about the challenge on spouses and children when they are asked to move. So some members choose to move for advancement purposes. Some are told that they have to move. With the increase in spending for national defence, the increase in the number of members, looking at recruitment and retention. Recruitment is one side of it, attracting people to our Canadian Armed Forces. But is there or will there be an opportunity for longer placements so that spouses who have careers, children who have friends and activities and so on, that is connected to housing, I believe, because these families may invest more in a house in the private market if they knew that they had some stability, and we may actually keep some of them longer, retain them if they had some sense of stability. And let me preface that by saying I understand that there are strategic reasons for moving, national defense reasons for moving, training reasons for asking members to move. But with more recruitment and larger spending, will there be some opportunity for balance in the length of time our recruits are able to stay in one location?
So I'll turn to my colleague in 1 minute, but I did want to add, in terms of the stress on military families who move either domestically or abroad, in the domestic context, one of the things our minister undertook was to write to all premiers across the country through a kind of a Seamless Canada initiative to try to make it easier for a family who has moved from one province to another or a territory to have services to be accelerated, right? If you're doing things like driver's licenses and things that can be quite burdensome. So we're looking at ways to kind of relieve that burden. And then on the duration of the post, I'll turn to Lieutenant General.
Thank you very much. Up front, I would tell you that we don't move people if we don't have to, by rule, by policy. So when we move people across the world, it's because they're needed on a post somewhere in the country, and that's a voluntary basis. If they need to go on career courses with a view to advance in ranks, again, this is on a voluntary basis. And I would say if they need, if they are being offered promotions, very rarely you can stay in the same location when you're being promoted, but you can also don't accept your promotion. So there are ways to be very stable. And some members do take advantage of stability. But I wouldn't coin it as being the norm. People want to improve their quality of life. They want to improve their family situation, so they go on courses and promotion as they should, I think. So that and this is where all those support mechanisms are warranted and fall in place. It's in order to enable them to do so that they are successful as individual, but also as a family unit.
Okay, appreciate that. One final question for me in looking to build out the availability of housing for members of our Canadian Armed Forces. You spoke about partnering with Build Canada Homes. Can you talk in greater detail about how the Canadian Armed Forces Housing Authority will be working with Build Canada Homes? I know we touched on communities and the need to, when we're looking at pressures on infrastructure and so on, but if we connect all of the dots, the Canadian Forces Housing Authority working with Build Canada Homes, looking at other agencies of government, the municipalities and provinces, can we elaborate on how National Defence intend to connect those dots as we move forward?
So the Canadian Forces Housing Agency is in weekly discussions with Build Canada Homes One, we want to align our modern methods of construction requirements. We would like to work with industry and be consistent from a government perspective on what we are asking industry to deliver for us. We also would like to coordinate so that we don't compete on the same markets. So modern methods of construction, I would say, is definitely an area where we're collaborating. We are starting early explorations to see whether there is other areas where we could have synergies between our two programs. And this is as far as I can mention it today, but I think that there is hope that we will find other opportunities.
Thank you. That is time, yes. Beginning our last and final round, again, 5 members of various times. Mr. Bazan, you'll lead us off for 5 minutes, and we'll finish a few minutes after 1 o'clock, but you have the floor for 5, Mr. Bazan.
Mr. Chair, so when you're talking about, going into different markets and buying off the market, like just again, we're in Gander last week, there's only 30 houses for sale. I met with the municipality, and there's almost a very limited housing stock that's currently available. And so have you been evaluating the marketplace to ensure you're not exacerbating the problem for the public, while still trying to address the needs that we have in the Canadian Armed Forces? Like there's an immediate problem that you have to address, not just the long-term solutions.
Yes, you're right that not all housing solutions will be effective or appropriate for all the markets. That is why we launched a flexible layer housing response plan, and that is composed of very different tools. And some housing markets will be appropriate for leasing, some others for acquisition, and other markets that don't have availability, we will need to mostly rely on building, which is the case for the North.
So, we have the Home Equity Assistance Program for those who actually buy in the marketplace, often get caught in upward or downward markets, have to sell out. Up until 2018, 100% of their losses that they may have incurred were covered by the Government of Canada. In April 2018, that changed to 80% only, or $30,000, whichever is less. Knowing that the market is unstable, are we going to restore the 100% for those that have to go and are forced to buy in the marketplace because there's an inadequate supply of proper housing for our proud members of the Canadian Armed Forces?
So I do share that concern, especially in today's market, and we're working with Treasury Board Secretariat to find a way forward on this one. I would tell you that of my concerns right now in the compensation and benefits sphere, this is probably my number one right now because of the market we're seeing. So I share that.
So we know that this affects those that got the raises, much deserved. But then the post-living differential changes as well, undermine especially those kind of in the middle management, our senior members within the non-commissioned and commissioned members. So are we also looking at changing post-living differential to make sure it's fair for all ranks? I'm hearing from guys that are master corporals that our take-home pay is less now than what it was before. Even though they got a pay raise, the post-living differential took more out of their pocket.
So the answer is yes, and we need to look at it on an annual basis. We interact weekly with Treasury Board Secretariat. The pay increase that we received last year, coupled with the military service pay, coupled with the CAF HD, solve a portion of that problem. I'm still concerned of today's market, how it's shaping up, and we're gathering data, and we're going through wing and bases in order to understand the problem. Because, as I mentioned, this is one that we need to keep a close eye on, but also to find a solution. And we don't own those policy, which is makes it harder.
Right, it's up to the government to make those changes. Now, the military service pay you mentioned, now that also involves a retroactive payment up to April 2025. Is that correct? Now, I'm understanding that this money hasn't been flowing, and that would all help offset some of the living costs that our troops are facing. So when are we going to have that problem rectified?
So the military service pay is the 8th initiative of a suite of 8 initiatives. It's the last one. It's also the most complex one because it's a bonus that is pensionable. And our system, which is COBOL-based, a very archaic base system, is not equipped to do this, nor is our pension plan
You guys aren't looking at
legislation.
Phoenix, I hope.
No, but it's more stable. So we're looking into this. We're looking at December, but the bulk of the pay increase was not through the military service pay. We're talking about the low 1,000 at best on this one. It was really the pay increase, the 13% and the 9% for the executives, that is solving most of the gap that you've identified.
So the other one, of course, is the rent hike that we saw as well for those that are in military housing, that they saw rent hikes go up that are commensurate with the pay increases. Can we freeze those rent hikes? I know I've asked Minister McGuinty that, and he said no, but I'm wondering how that's impacting upon the morale of our serving members.
So you mean the rent from the CFHAs?
Yeah.
So there's a limit of 25% maximum shelter charge.
You're stealing from Peter to pay Paul if you're going to take away the benefits of getting a salary increase when you're going to pull it away from with the rent hike.
Well, I don't think that the prices, the shelter charge went up to the same extent that the pay increase did. So therefore, I think our members are in a better situation today than they were a year and a half ago, for example.
But if you got a pay increase and moved you into a new tax bracket, plus you've got an increase in rent if you're living in CFHA housing, then all of a sudden you're actually behind the 8 ball compared to where you were before all these changes came into place. You probably heard those stories. I know we are.
Thank you, Ms. Bell. That's your time. General, would you like a last answer to that at all, just while the time's remaining?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All I would say is I'm no tax expert, so I cannot understand exactly the new tax bracket associated with the pay increase. But my understanding is that members are much happier today than they were a year and a half ago with the salary that they have, and they can afford more to be on the market, and they're also protected on the RHU by 25%. So this is not the concern is really about people that will enter the market and will have to sell at a lower price, and this is where I'm putting the efforts right now.
Thank you very much. Ms. Yip, back to you for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. This question is directed to Mr. Hammerschmidt. Could you update us on the modernization efforts? First, in terms of communal showers, where individual showers need to be built. Second, properly functioning sanitary waste systems. And third, access to Wi-Fi. I think these are pretty basic needs.
Thank you for the question, and I agree they are important needs that need to be met. We have a housing stock that is fairly old. I think the Auditor General mentioned 60 years. Across this entire system, it's 54 years is the average age of our quarters, and so they were built at a time that had different training requirements. At a time, there was different living standards, and so we know that there's pretty significant investments that need to be made. One of the fortunate things is that last year we completed a survey effectively of all of our quarters facilities across the entire country. So we've got a very good picture now of where the condition of all of our quarters, where the needs are met and where they're unmet, whether the quarters that exist at those locations are suitable for operational needs, and a good picture of the living standards at all of those locations. And so we're in a much better position now to prioritize the dollars that are coming in, and fortunately there are more dollars coming in that are going to allow us to address those issues. So just on maintenance and repair, this year my budget for that will increase by 60%. Next year it doubles. The year after it doubles again. And so we'll be in a position to get after a lot of maintenance and repair, and equally in the minor capital, like more than upkeep but less than a major new building. That range of investment is going to increase again quite significantly. 24 projects last year, next year, or this year, 35. And so we are ramping up our ability to make those investments. And living standards is a key area where we'll be focused on, as well as health and safety, of course. So those kind of issues will be addressed. And just on Wi-Fi, I can just flag that in terms of barracks or actual kind of training accommodations, about 75% of all the buildings that require Wi-Fi have Wi-Fi, and there are plans in place right now to advance and accelerate the remaining 25%.
Thank you for that update. That was interesting to know. Ms. Zuro, housing doesn't exist on its own, but to live in a community requires support. So with the increase of housing, will there be enough childcare supports, medical services, and access to other municipal services?
Thank you for the question. So as I mentioned, the agency's mandate is within housing only. However, we do find an opportunity with our Phase 2 National Housing Construction Program to incorporate and build thriving communities, not just housing. So we are collaborating with the internal stakeholders that are responsible for childcare and for commercial space to be able to incorporate where there is opportunities in our Phase 2, all of those needs as well. So far, there are early discussions. We are trying to define the needs by base where we're going to be building. And again, you will see more thriving communities in the future now that there is funding and that we're going to be building more available housing.
Thank you. Ms. Fox, I know you've only been in the position for a short time, but has the 2015 Auditor General's report on roughly the same topic been addressed? Have the recommendations been met?
I think that, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. We have looked at previous reports, but things change so significantly that, yes, maybe they were addressed at the time. They are not, at this point, there's a lot more work to be done based on what the Auditor General found and the recommendations. So the focus is very much on ensuring that we respond to that as quickly as possible.
Okay. Ms. Zuro, what are the timelines for housing availability for the 3 underutilized federal lands, for example, the Halifax and Toronto lands? Or is that Mr. Hammerschmidt?
I can start. Yeah, so as Ms. Zuro mentioned, we've launched these dual-use Pathfinder initiatives. The goal here is to work with the private sector to redevelop underutilized parcels of department land. We've launched broker processes in Esquimalt, in Halifax, in Toronto. And so far, we've had kind of the most uptake on this in Halifax, just given the market conditions there. And so we are in the process now of moving towards a development of about 200 units that we hope that sometime in the near term we'll be able to advance with a developer.
Your time is up unless you have a short question.
No, thank
Very
you.
good. All right, moving right along then. Encore une fois, Monsieur Lemire, pour 2 minutes 30 secondes.
Once again, Mr. Lemire, 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you, Chair. Ms. Fox, one thing I'd like to highlight, it's been months, even years, that I've been trying to have a discussion with someone from the CAF. We had a good exchange with Ms. Beck at this committee with regard to the situation of Abitibi-Témiscamingue. How could you help highlight the situation regarding military equipment, training, recruitment, and other issues, but we haven't had luck getting a response for this direct meeting with the forces. Could you follow up with myself and my team so that we can make that meeting happen and we can highlight the potential that could be tapped into for the Canadian Armed Forces? Thank you for the question, and of course, it will be my pleasure to work with you to organize that meeting. Thank you very much. Just one point in the AG's report, there's a point saying that the National Defense doesn't have information or data on the current status of the housing units that are available. Has there been improvements made to that in terms of capturing new information and onboarding new software? Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would say, as my colleague mentioned, we took stock of the situation across the country, and beyond that, It's really about making sure that there is an information collection standard and that there's follow-up and reporting at the national level. That will be great if to have a snapshot of what's happening, what needs to be done, and what needs our attention. If you say, yes, we'll do inspections every 3 or 5 years, that should be done systematically, and then we should verify these that these are being done and take action when necessary. Thank you. Your plan refers to $2.2 billion to renovate more than 2,000 housing units, so it boils down to $150 million per year. And we're looking at about $5,000 per unit in terms of funding set aside, and in total it's $2.3 billion. So in 2024, there was a gap of $75,000, but now the market is even less certain. So how will you make sure that that gap could be closed? That's a good question. The costs are not known. As you mentioned, there's a lot of uncertainty in the market due to a lot of factors. But we are in the process of building apartment units, more dense apartment units with more units of housing. So the per unit price will be a lot more favorable compared to what we had previously, where we were building single-family homes or housing units that contain 6 units. Now we're looking at 6 to 12 and up to 40 units. And in total, we will be building 100 units of apartment. Thank you.
Suivant, c'est Monsieur Deltel.
Up next, Mr. Deltel, for 5 minutes. I think you will be sharing your time. It's up to you to decide. Thank you very much, Chair. We will have to come back to the Commissioner of Ethics report, which was quite critical with regard to Ms. Fox. And the report says favoring someone is inappropriate. And there's evidence that Ms. Fox abused her position to favor a friend. She had undue influence on senior management to have her friend hired for a position for which they were not qualified. Ms. Fox, do you regret having done that? Yes or no? As I stated, I take notice of the report. Any regrets? I take my responsibility very seriously with regard to what's been made public, and I think about my actions and how my actions have had an impact on the system. I was motivated by undertaking important organizational change. I was motivated by the fact that we had the desire and of course the need to have a public service that represents Canadians, and that I will, going forward, really think about my decisions and their impacts. Well, this report isn't very new. You must have had time to think this through, so no regrets as far as we can see. So we need to tell people what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. And the same applies when we have an individual and a position that is not fit for that individual. Well, it's the Commissioner of Ethics. The Commissioner says that the individual was not a friend. Well, an acquaintance. Well, I mean, it wouldn't hurt to say I shouldn't have done that.
Just under 3 minutes.
Thank you. I've kind of got a two-pronged question here. In a previous Auditor General report, we looked at RCMP training, and they had were given a number of that they were short 3,200 members that they needed to train, and yet their capability depot was only 1,500 a year, but they could only afford to train 1,200 and change. I fear that we're going to go down a similar path in housing in regards to you've got this goal of 10,000 houses, and yet you just stated that you did not have numbers as to a cost per unit for the housing. Can you tell me how we're going to get to 10,000? Well, number one, if you think that there is going to be enough funding that has been allocated so that you will actually be able to purchase, build, to get those 10,000 units, in that, I believe you said 2029 is the number where you're going to be needing more, those housing units. Can you actually tell me that there is a plan to have, there is enough funds there to get to those numbers? And then I'll start with that part of it.
Okay, I'll just clarify that I did not intend to mention that we don't have the cost per unit. I mentioned that it was early to tell how much was the cost per unit, given that we are, for phase 2, we are just starting to launch our planning phase. What we are seeing in the contracts that we have awarded in the recent months is that the cost per unit is actually quite lower than what we had anticipated, because the constructions that we're doing are more dense.
So do you have the numbers, like you talked about the different bases? Do you have it broken down? And you may not have all those numbers now, but you can maybe provide the committee with those numbers if you have them later. Just say it's going to cost X amount in New Brunswick, X amount in BC versus Yukon or Edmonton, wherever it might be.
We have estimations of how much that would cost. They're based on a rough order of magnitude of 500,000 per unit for the phase 2. Now, for phase 1, we've already awarded the contracts. We have the exact amount that those contracts have awarded, and we can provide them. It would be my pleasure to provide them to the committee.
That would be good. Can you also, I'm not sure who maybe it might be yourself that would be good to answer this. In the numbers for rent that you collect, can you tell us how much goes back to actually for maintenance from those funds versus providing new facilities, replacement of facilities? Or do you even have those numbers that you would work backwards to say this is what our percentages are for those?
Yes, so we have those numbers, and as I mentioned, we publish annual numbers on our annual report. So based on our operating budget, that is based on the rents that we collect. So the agency is self-funded through the rents of the occupants.
Sorry, maybe I wasn't clear on that. I guess I want to know if there's a strategy to say, okay, we collect X dollars for rent, and we're actually allocating those in the future, or that funds are they allocated just for maintenance, or are they allocated to potentially for replacement in the future on that part of it? Because I suspect that that's not the case.
No, that's a good question. So we use our rents for the operations, maintenance, and renovations, and we are funded by the government on our capital funding for new construction and recapitalization. So from the operations budget, we reported in our last report that 84% of the budget was going back to the repairs and the renovations of the portfolio, including 11% that was for the housing operations, so cutting the grass and snow removal. The majority of our funds goes back to the portfolio.
Very briefly, Mr. Seaton, you're doing very good. Just want to give you that chance. Finally, Mr. McKinnon, you have the last 5 minutes. Over to you, please.
I'm going to carry on. I talked earlier about accountability and who's responsible. I think the answer was the DFO is responsible, but that's a little bit too blurry for my taste. I think for Canadian Forces, for the housing, the Canadian Forces Housing Agency is responsible for that. Would you? And as Chief Executive Officer, I think we need to be able to hold you accountable. Would you say that's correct?
That is correct. I'm accountable for the residential housing portfolio,
okay,
not for the training quarters or the quarters.
I understand. Do you need any further clarification of that mandate? Is that mandate sufficiently clear for the Canadian Forces Housing Agency?
The mandate is clear. We actually revised it last year to include, we are moving from managing Crown Housing to providing and meeting the needs of the Canadian Armed Forces members.
And is there anything more that you need from the government, from us, to help you meet this mandate?
That's a great question. I think I ask myself the same question every day. And so far, I can tell you that in the past 2 years, everything that we've asked, we have been given. And so we will continue to reflect on that and work with the department to either request further authorities or funding if necessary.
Yeah. So one of the things we heard earlier was that of 35 housing units, 32 of them needed major repairs that weren't done. Is that a problem of lack of resources, lack of people to do it? And there's also a consideration of many inspections that weren't done. Do you need more resources? Do you need more money to do this?
Maybe I'll jump in there just simply because that was a reference to quarters.
Yeah, okay.
And so on quarters, as with all infrastructure, I mean, we manage the portfolio on a risk-based, data-driven approach that allows us to make decisions around how to focus, how to target what is, at the end of the day, limited dollars. And so the repairs in question that were not done, at the end of the day, they probably were just simply the result of repairs on other priority issues being done instead, given limited resources. Again, though, as I mentioned, going forward, that's going to change quite dramatically with significant more money in maintenance, repair, minor capital, and major capital funding.
I think in the last 2 minutes, I'll just see if anyone needs to have any summarizing remarks. Ms. Fox, would you like to wrap up anything?
Thank you, and thank you, Chair. I think what I would say is with the department reaching its 2% of NATO spending, we can now invest into our operational readiness, into our capabilities, into the defense industry at large. But what's most important to that, it's kind of the investments in rebuilding the defense team. And part of that is housing, and now we've got funding over a long term to allow us to plan, to build, to repair, and to use innovative ways to provide housing to military members. And so we'll be working very hard over the next, like I said, weeks and months to advance this agenda, and I think housing will be a big part of our priorities. Thank you.
Marks? No? I guess that's it for me then. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. I want to thank our witnesses for their testimony today in participation in relation to the report on the Housing Canadian Armed Forces member of the 2025 Fall Report of the Auditor General of Canada. I will excuse the witnesses. I got a couple of points here for members just to wrap up, but you're all excused. Thank you very, very much. I know we'll see some of you again very, very shortly. Just so you know, we're having a meeting tomorrow. It's an unusual meeting, an informal meeting, I should say, with Public Accounts Committee from the United Kingdom coming in to discuss the renovations at Centre Block, and I do hope members will be able to attend that. We, of course, had an audit report on that in the previous year. And then on the regular Wednesday meeting, we're going to be looking at the main estimates, and then the public accounts with respect to the Bank of Canada. That's it for now, everyone. Have a great day, and we will see you, many of you, I hope, tomorrow and again Wednesday. Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.